The prototype of the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress flew for the first time in April 1952 and immediately transformed the balance of air power between the Soviet Union and the United States. Even though it would not enter service for some years, it was a vast technological leap beyond the B-29 and the B-36. It could fly halfway around the world without refueling and reach speeds close to the speed of sound. It was an impressive aircraft and would remain the symbol of American intercontinental air power for 30 years. In the 1955 Moscow Aviation Day air show, Western observers watched a huge swept-wing bomber fly past, powered not by jets, but by turbo-driven propellers. The observers thought it could be little more than a curiosity and no match for the Myasishchev Bison they had seen the year before, but they were in for a shock. Among an impressive array of Soviet Air Force equipment, they had just glimpsed what would prove to be the world's fastest propeller-driven aircraft, a bomber with a range of almost 8,000 miles, a bomber quite capable of flying across the North Pole and of reaching America. The turboprop engine that gave the Bear its speed and range was developed by the Kuznetsov Bureau. Kuznetsov were helped by engineers who had worked with Juncker's company, recruited from Germany at the end of the war. Between 1950 and 1954, they developed a turbo shaft engine that could produce over 12,000 horsepower and drive a pair of counter-rotating propellers. The propellers themselves were supersonic, with automatic pitch change. The combination of engine and propeller was extremely efficient and justified Tupolev's decision to seek long range and high speed through turboprop rather than pure jet power. The Bear could fly 100 miles an hour faster than anyone thought possible in a propeller-driven aircraft. It could reach 575 miles an hour. The arrival of the Tu-95 Bear in service in the late 50s was a unique achievement for the Tupolev Design Bureau. It was the only turboprop-driven strategic bomber ever to enter first-line service in the world. The Bear was a direct descendant of the Tupolev Tu-4 Bull, which means that it was also closely related to the American B-29, from which the Bull was copied. But superficially, at least, the similarity is not obvious. The Bear is a very exotic-looking aircraft. The appearance of the Bear is dominated by its propellers. They are enormous, 16.5 feet in diameter, 4 blades on each propeller, 4 engines, 2 propellers driven by each engine, revolving in opposite directions, a total of 32 blades. The combination of 32 propeller blades and 4 extremely powerful turboprop engines made the Bear one of the loudest aircraft in the history of aviation. Its noise echoed round Soviet airfields for miles. There are even stories of American fighter pilots experiencing discomfort because of engine noise from Bears under escort penetrating their cockpits. The Bear had a crew of between 8 and 10. The number varied depending on the nature of the mission. There were 2 pilots and 1 or 2 navigators. The rest of the crew were radar operators and gunners. The gunners and observers at the rear of the aircraft were physically separated from the pilot station at the front by about 50 yards of fuselage. The observation blisters on each side of the rear fuselage were used by gunners to aim the cannon in the remotely controlled turret underneath the aircraft's belly. On versions without the ventral turret, they could be used to house surveillance or photographic equipment. A Soviet manned bomber fleet capable of striking freely around the world had been Stalin's dream, a response to the development of the great American bombers of the late 40s and 50s. Khrushchev's attitude was different. He decided that increasing reliance would be placed on long-range surface-to-surface missiles for the delivery of Soviet nuclear weapons. By the mid-50s, the intercontinental ballistic missile seemed more promising to Khrushchev than the manned bomber. His opinion was shared by other high-ranking military personnel. Long-range bomber personnel began to worry about their careers. But even though under Khrushchev the role of the long-range bomber force was downgraded, it was still in a condition to be revived. Even when the supersonic backfire and later the Blackjack entered service, there was still a place for the Bear. In 1984, 30 years after the prototype Tu-95 flew, a new variant identified by NATO as Bear H entered service. It could carry a long-range cruise missile and was capable of hitting targets inside the USA without ever entering American airspace. At the time, the Bear H, which appeared with much less fanfare than the supersonic Blackjack, was seen as a major threat to Europe and America. The cruise missile it carried, the AS-15, was considered a serious challenge to the American air defense system. After almost 40 years of service, the great rumble of the Bear's engines can still be heard across Russia, Europe, and the oceans of the world. These days, they are even becoming welcome guests at some of the world's great air shows, giving Western audiences a close-up look at one of the most extraordinary aircraft ever built.